Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
This whole pandemic has been increasingly focused on public health and only public health. There has been very little balance from what we have seen to balance the interests of public health with the interests of the economy or the interests of freedoms and liberties. Public health officials, their job is to focus on public health. And so then we hope that the courts will look at things and bring more balance to it. And unfortunately, in this case, they haven't.
I want to thank you so much for your support. I want to thank you for every dollar, for every donation you have sent to the Rebel News for the lawyers, that I can stay out of jail. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Adam Soos here for Rebel News, and I'm once again with Sarah Miller of JSS Barristers with, as we promised, an update on the ruling on the Pawlowski matter. If you could maybe, for those who have not been following the story, just give a quick summary of the ruling from Justice Germains.
Yeah, so Adam, what happened was Justice Germains issued two decisions this past week with regard to the Pawlowski brothers. One is, in my opinion, much more important as for your viewership and Alberta public at large, regarding the Rook order. So the Rook order is the order that we have talked about a few times now. It's an order that has been put out by Justice Rook, which says anybody who is breaching the public health orders is also in breach of his order, and they're essentially prohibited from breaching public health orders. So it's an extra enforcement mechanism that Alberta Health Services went to Justice Rook with no notice to any person whatsoever, did do it in open court, but obtained an order from him to have this extra enforcement measure to stop anybody from breaching a public health order. That is what Justice Germains found, is that initial order from May 6th applied to practically anybody who received notice of it. And notice, according to Justice Germains, is not service, understanding, those high burdens, but more, do you have a sense of what you're supposed to or not supposed to do? And so that order was in place from May 6th to about May 13th, I think, for about 5 days or so. During that time, that is when Artur Pawlowski and David Pawlowski were arrested, and then the order was amended. And so during that period of time, there was a very broad provision in that order that said it applied to anybody who is acting independently and to like effect. Now, our arguments in court back in May were that independently and to like effect meant like effect. So it was really targeted towards the campouts and the protests for the rodeo, those types of things that were occurring up in central Alberta area, Innisfail and Bowden and those types of things, Mirror, Alberta. We argued that it should really have a narrow application for that focus. Justice Germains disagreed with us, found that independently and to like effect just meant anybody who's breaching any public health order. So arguably anybody during that time period who knew about the order being out there, who had their in-laws over for dinner, had anybody during that time period, gathering in excess of the gathering limits, or didn't wear a mask when required to. So it was very broad application.
So functionally speaking, maybe like a member of the Legislative Assembly, the Premier of the province, you could probably argue that it might apply to them and maybe there should be consequences. That's an aside, however. On the spectrums of potential rulings, like best case scenario to maybe you don't like the ruling but you see kind of where they came from, to complete adherence to what Jason Kenney, Dina Hinshaw, the CMHO, Alberta Health Services, their entire sort of strict line, where does this ruling fall?
So this ruling falls so far very much in the favor and in the camp of Alberta Health Services. Alberta Health Services has been granted, people that work with Alberta Health Services have been granted a great degree of authority under the Public Health Act in response to quarantine, in response to COVID. And so the public health orders have been issued under that broad authority. They also have ways to enforce and punish those who don't comply, right? And we've seen that before with a number of pastors and others in Alberta who have been ticketed under the public health orders. So Section 73 of the Public Health Act says, if Dr. Hinshaw decides to issue an order in these circumstances, then if you fail to comply, that's a penalty and you can be prosecuted for that. It's not criminal, but it's an administrative regulatory procedure. Now, this decision, also not criminal, it's a civil proceeding in civil court, but has fallen wholly in the Alberta Health Services camp so far. Says, you know what, the interpretation of Alberta Health Services is adopted and applied. The very high burden of proof was supposedly met according to Justice Germains, and it really falls, he really didn't accept any of the Pawlowski's defenses or frankly the evidence that they provided in sworn affidavits, except to a very limited degree, and found wholly in the camp of Alberta Health Services. So it's very much in favor with the public health organization.
So before we get into the sort of plan moving forward and sanctions and those things, perhaps if I could sort of ask you to wax legal on the matter, does this set a dangerous precedent? Obviously, we understand health bureaucrats' primary focus is to save lives and to enact policies, but one would think that the legislative or political branches, and then definitely the legal branches, which Justice Germains would have been the representative of, should take consideration of not only the health measures, but the economic and charter rights considerations that factor into this. Did that factor in any way, and is there a dangerous precedent set?
So, we did make charter arguments in front of Justice Germains, saying that because there were charter breaches, because there were charter issues, that he should exercise his discretion and not find them in contempt. He didn't accept any of those. He very quickly disposed of those arguments in his decision. So in that sense, it sets a dangerous precedent, because what he said was the acts of CPS and the remand facility, because they are not Alberta Health Services, that then anything that Alberta Health Services wants can't be hindered by charter breaches of others, as in CPS or the Remand Center. I have a really hard time reconciling that with if you're looking at criminal proceedings or even border crossing proceedings where a CBSA official searches you, that search is found to be contrary to Section 8 of the Charter, say, for some reason or another. The prosecution service doesn't get to go, whoa, that was CBSA. That's not us, right? And that's essentially what AHS has successfully done here. So it's a very dangerous precedent. Now, to reply to your previous comment about the balancing of interests, this whole pandemic has been increasingly focused on public health and only public health. There has been very little balance from what we have seen to balance the interests of public health with the interests of the economy or the interests of freedoms and liberties. Now, you see various degrees of that throughout the country and different impacts, right, at different times depending on the provisions. But public health officials, their job is to focus on public health. And so then we hope that the courts will look at things and bring more balance to it. And unfortunately in this case they haven't. So dangerous.
Certainly unfortunate. And then, so what's the plan coming forward? I believe we have a date set for July 27th for sanctions. What's that process going to look like?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. The sanction hearing will occur on the 27th. Alberta Health Services has to provide their written submissions and their position on sanction by July 13th, so then we'll have a sense of what they're seeking. Under the rules of court for Alberta, they're allowed to seek fines or jail time. Those are essentially the remedies, or both. And then we have a week to respond to that and put forward our arguments. So we're still drafting those, still figuring that out, obviously, and a lot of that will depend on what position Alberta Health Services take. But then we'll have a hearing on that, and we likely will bring up a lot of the charter arguments again. The door is still open to raise those at sanction, although they were dismissed at first instance on getting a stay of the proceedings.
Well, we'll certainly get in touch with you again once we've heard perhaps what AHS is seeking as sanctions, and perhaps what you propose as an alternative. I want to thank you always throughout this for being willing to meet up, even on a hot day like this, to give us an update on the case. We're going to continue to follow this case, certainly, so we look forward to bringing folks more updates from you. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Soos.
I want to thank you so much for your support. I want to thank you for every dollar, for every donation you have sent to the Rebel News for the lawyers, that I can stay out of jail. Thank you, thank you, thank you. May God bless you for your heart. You're part of this movement. You're part of this defense. Without you, we would not be able to do what we have accomplished so far. Thank you very much, and may God bless you.